Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to give this seminar to the European Astrobiology Institute. My name is Floris. I am a senior scientist at the Netherlands Institute for Space Research, SRON. I'm also a professor at the University of Groningen. And in addition, I'm involved in the PEPSI network, which is studying planetary and exoplanetary science in the Netherlands. And with the OLIFE, I'm coordinator of the OLIFE program. That's an interdisciplinary research program from various natural sciences, geoscience, astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, trying to understand the origin and evolution of life, both on Earth and elsewhere in the universe. And I'm also involved with the Origin Center. That's a collaboration from of scientists in the Netherlands, also when thinking about these questions. Since I don't quite know what your background is, and your backgrounds may vary anyway, I'd like to first make sure we start from the same page. See if I can move slide. That is, yes, I can. And then start from where we are, our home in the universe, which is the solar system. This is just it's not quite a cartoon, but it is a schematic picture. It's very much not to scale, but it illustrates the planets of our solar system. You can see a few things from this. You can first of all see that each planet is a bit different. No two planets are quite the same. That's one thing. And the second thing is that there is quite a variety in size. And in fact, this picture doesn't really do justice to the sizes. It looks as if the Earth and Neptune are almost the same size. And in reality, the diameter of the Earth is almost 4 times smaller than that of Neptune. So the differences in size are bigger than they appear here. What you can more or less see is that there are two basic types of planets in our solar system. There are small rocky planets close to the sun, and there are large gas planets further out. And then there's a lot of stuff hidden under other. So these are in particular asteroids. So there's a belt of small rocks about at this location, known as the Kuiper belt. There is also an inner belt, known as the main asteroid belt, here between Mars and Jupiter. There are comets traveling on eccentric orbits through the solar system, and there are, of course, moons around planets. So there's lots of stuff missing from this picture, but the basics of planets are, I guess, covered. All right, with that brief introduction, let me tell you what I plan to do in the coming, I don't know, 45 minutes or so. I'd first like to tell you about the exoplanet population, what we know about it, and a little bit about how we know this also. Then I'd like to discuss what kind of planets are habitable. And I'd like to use two approaches to this question, and we'll see that they lead to quite different answers. So something's missing from this discussion, and that's the topic of the third part. What could be wrong? Why are we not fully understanding habitability as it is? And if there is time, I have a fourth part about searches for life on other planets. Let's see how far we get, and we begin by studying exoplanets. So as of last year, we know 5,000 planets around other stars. A very impressive number, and there are several different types of planets known. As you see here from this graph, about 1/3 are gas giants, much like Saturn or Jupiter, a bit larger sometimes. About 1/3 are somewhat smaller, like Neptune or so. And then there is a category, again about 1/3 known, of the so-called super-Earth planets, and these have intermediate masses. And this is very interesting because this is a type of planet that doesn't exist in our solar system. So there's a size between Earth and Neptune. And then a relatively small fraction of planets is about the size of the Earth, but this is only the as we see it. This is not necessarily what is the true distribution. This is one thing one needs to keep in mind in astronomy and perhaps everywhere, is that the observed distribution is not necessarily the same as what the intrinsic distribution is, because some planets are easier to see than others, right? So there are key points to take away from this already. So of course, we don't know all these planets in great detail, right? We know the solar system planets much better. We can study them we can visit them and learn a lot about their details. But they remain individuals, right? They're all 8, they're different. And in contrast, the planets around other stars, we don't know so much about them, but we know quite well what a typical planet is, right? Because we have very good statistics on these exoplanets. And the second point is what I said, is that the observed distribution is quite far from the intrinsic. It's not, don't take away from this that there are fewer Earth-like planets than Jupiter-like planets. It's actually more the other way around. However, the Jupiter-like planets are easier to see. So how do we know this? So there are 3 main techniques. There are many techniques, but there are 3 main techniques to find exoplanets. And historically, the first is known as radial velocity, and it's shown here in the bottom left. So there's a star here, and there's a planet orbiting it, and it's kept in its orbit by gravity. Star pulls at the planet, but planet pulls back, and so the star is also moving a little bit. And these motions are small, but with a modern good telescope, we can see them. In particular, if the motion is towards us or away from us, leading to a redshift or blue shift of the light. And so this is historically how the first exoplanets were found in the middle of the 1990s, and this led to the Nobel Prize in Physics 2019. The second method is known as transit, and so this happens when it is realizing that some planets, if the orbit has the right inclination, they move in front of their host star, and so they block a bit of the starlight. And of course, if a star gets a little bit less bright just once, that doesn't mean so much. But if this happens periodically, right, this means that there is a planet around that star. And this is how these days most of the exoplanets are found. And it is in particular also how small exoplanets are found very effectively. Famous examples include Proxima b, so that's the planet around our nearest neighbor star, and also the 7-planet system around TRAPPIST-1 star. And then the third method is known as direct imaging. That's shown here at the bottom right. And that is closest to what you would say is just taking a picture of a planetary system. The difficulty with that is it's not so much that the planets are weak objects. After all, with big telescopes, we can see galaxies in the very early universe, and they are really faint and because they're so far away. And so planets are not so faint, but the problem is that there is a very bright star right next to it. So you need to somehow get rid of this starlight. So they managed to do that in this example here. So this X marks the spot where the star used to be. And now that they have removed the starlight, we can see the planets surrounding it. But in general, that remains very difficult. So colleagues are working very hard to improve this technique, because of course this is ideal, right? This is the only way where we can directly see light from the planets. All the both other methods are just we see something is going on with the starlight, but here we can see the planets directly. So we need to see planets, we need extremely stable instruments, right? To see these velocities, we need very good measurements of velocities of stars. And this can be done these days. It actually can be done very well from the ground with not even such large telescopes. Main thing we need is stable velocity measurements. Transits need very good photometry. Again, very stable conditions are needed, and this is best done from space. So the Corot and Kepler missions were important around 2010 doing this, and then these days the TESS and Cheops missions are doing the same thing much better from space, and then further missions are planned. And for this imaging, as I mentioned, high contrast in the image is needed, and this is work in progress. The main thing that we're finding is that planets are at least as common, probably a bit more common actually, than stars are. And we also know that these days of comets around other stars, asteroids around other stars, and also dust around other stars. The one thing we don't know, haven't found yet, are moons around planets around other stars. But they must exist, we just haven't found them, and this is somewhat surprising. That of course moons are smaller than planets, but they're not that small. The biggest moons in the solar system are bigger than the smallest planets. So my prediction would be that within the next few years we will see the first exomoon, but we haven't found it yet. Good, so now that we have found a lot of planets, what can we learn about them? Well, first thing you want to know as an astronomer is just how big is it? And this can be either in terms of the mass or in terms of the size of the planet. Let's start with the mass. So this radial velocity method is based on gravity, so this is obviously sensitive to mass. However, the mass you get out depends on the inclination of the orbit, right? How it is oriented towards us. So this gives from these velocities alone, you get a lower limit to the mass. But if you have a transiting planet, then you know the inclination, right? You see in the orbit right edge on. So, and you can again measure this velocity, and you can so you know then the mass, and from the depth of this transit signal, you can infer the size of the planet. So together you get both, right? The mass and the size. And what we find is that there is a very large range in planet masses, right? From below an Earth mass to over 10 times the mass of Jupiter, all the way up to the limit where stars are. Keep in mind again that there are selection effects to these methods, right? Small planets are more difficult to see, so the distribution needs to be corrected for that. And also planets far from their star are more difficult to see. And this is simply because their periods take long to complete, right? So it's not intrinsically difficult to see, it just needs a lot of time before you can be sure you're seeing a planet. Take Jupiter as an example, it takes 12 years to orbit the sun. So to make sure that you have discovered Jupiter, right, from another star system, you'll need several orbits. So this could easily mean you're 50 years later, you can be sure. So it's not difficult, but it takes time. There are also several new types of planets that aren't known in our own solar system. So there are very hot planets. In the case of gas giants, these are known as hot Jupiters. And they are thought to not have formed at their current position, but to have formed further out and then migrated inwards. There are also objects called lava planets. And so these are also very hot, but hot rocky planets, so hot that in fact their surfaces are molten like lava. And this is also presumably what the Earth was like when it was young. Then there are super Earth, as I mentioned, so with these intermediate size planets. The diagram here on the right is a distribution of sizes, and what you see here in the middle is a bit of a dip in the distribution. So there are more there are a lot of small and not a lot of large planets, and there is a bit of a dip in between. So it is not like in the solar system that you just have large and small planets, but it is true that there is a bit of a dip in between, although not as large as in the solar system. And then the fourth kind of unknown case that is unknown in the solar system are very distant planets. So these are the most distant planet in the solar system is 40 times as far away from the sun as the Earth is, but around other stars we have cases where it's 100 times this distance. Good. So far for masses and sizes. Then what about temperatures? So it's difficult to really measure directly the temperature of an exoplanet. It can sometimes be done, but usually it is estimated just from knowing what the temperature of the star is and how far the planet is away from the star. Right? Then you can just if you just assume that the planet is only heated by starlight, you can work it out and get an idea of the temperature of the planet. And you can, so this involves a few assumptions, and what you find is that there is a large range again of temperatures, can be as cold as the coldest object in our solar system, but they can be also much hotter. So these are examples here in this diagram of so-called of those hot Jupiters, which are indeed thousands of Kelvin, thousands of degrees, much hotter than what we have here. You can, in fact, do a bit better than only assuming starlight as radiation. You can include other effects like the greenhouse effect, or also some planets still carry internal heat, and there are various other effects that you can try and take into account and refine these temperature estimates. Then another key parameter of planets is the density, and this is very interesting because density is a clue to the composition, right? So for these transiting planets, where we can measure the mass and the size, you can just divide mass by volume and get the bulk density. And you find that some planets are, have a density like that of the Earth, so they are presumably made of rock. And others have a lower density, more like Jupiter, so they are mostly made of gas. And in fact, more extreme cases exist also, so very dense planets or also very low density planets. So these are either made of exotic material or somehow conditions are unstable, not like what we have here. And then, of course, there are also planets with intermediate densities. So these could be planets made of pure water or pure carbon or pure carbon monoxide, but more likely they have a mixed composition, and this is a bit like the case of Neptune, for example. How can we break this degeneracy? Well, in particular by studying the atmosphere. Studying the stellar composition helps, but what helps in particular is to learn more about the atmospheres of planets. Let's quickly remind ourselves what atmospheres there are around the planets in our solar system. So here at the top there are the atmospheres of Venus, Earth, Mars, and Titan, the biggest moon of Saturn. So let's begin with the Earth. The air that you and I are breathing right now is mostly made up of nitrogen at a pressure of 1 bar. And the most similar case is Titan. It has also a nitrogen atmosphere at a little bit more higher pressure, 1.5 bar. The difference is in temperature. So, our temperature of Earth is such that the clouds are predominantly water, and in the case of Titan, the clouds are mostly methane. It's much colder there. And then the atmospheres of Mars and Venus are both made of carbon dioxide predominantly. They differ a lot in pressure though. So the Venus has this very dense atmosphere of almost 100 times the pressure that we have. And in contrast, Mars has a very tenuous atmosphere. And there's also, again, differences in the cloud composition. And at the bottom, there's the gas giant Jupiter with an atmosphere mostly made of hydrogen gas. Yeah, let's skip the other details. So there's already a large variety in atmospheres in our solar system, and we can learn a lot from these atmospheres. Astronomers are very interested in atmospheres. Why is that? Well, of course, because you learn about you can learn about their composition. It's easier to study atmospheres because they're gas than it is to study planetary surfaces or interiors, right? You have to keep in mind though that the atmosphere is not necessarily representative. Take Earth as an example, right? Atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, but that doesn't mean that the Earth as a whole is mostly nitrogen. Atmospheres are also very interesting because they have a lot of dynamical effects, right? You have winds, you can measure rotation, you sometimes have gases escaping from the atmospheres. So all of that you can also see in exoplanets. Atmospheres also tell you a lot about the formation and evolution of the atmospheres. That's not really today's topic. But what is today's topic is habitability, and this is again where atmospheres play a major role because an atmosphere helps to retain your volatile material. Right? If you have volatiles and they can just evaporate and escape, then well, you lose them. But if you have an atmosphere, right? If water evaporates here on Earth, it will condense out in the atmosphere and rain back, and so the water doesn't get lost. We keep it. There's a bit of a cycle, you could say. Yeah, so this is also why atmospheres are important for habitability. How can we see atmospheres around exoplanets? Well, there are several different ways. I don't want to go into too much detail, but transiting exoplanets again play a big role there. So we take this planet here that is just transiting its host star. So the planet itself is just black and blocking some of the starlight. But you can see here the atmosphere here shown in green, which doesn't quite block the starlight, but it just filters the starlight, right? So you can see that the gases in the planet's atmosphere just absorb certain wavelengths and change the color of the light a little bit. And so this is how we can study the atmospheres around extrasolar planets. There are other methods, but let's not get into too much detail here. You can ask me questions, of course, about it if you want later. So what do we learn? What have we learned so far about atmospheres around extrasolar planets? Well, we know over 100 examples now, mostly from space-based spectroscopy. So we see winds, we see escapes, gases escaping, we see rotation also, and there's a quite impressive list of different gases that are seen in the exoplanetary atmospheres. Mostly, I should say, this is possible for giant exoplanets. It's not, and also a few intermediate mass planets. It's not yet possible to do this for objects as small as the Earth orbiting other stars. So this is something for the future. Colleagues are working on making that possible, but we're not quite there yet. James Webb telescope is actually doing its best to also advance our understanding of exoplanetary atmospheres. Here's a nice recent example of the planet called WASP-39b. This is an infrared spectrum, infrared transit spectrum, and you see here signals due to water and carbon monoxide. I think these were already known, but what is especially new about this spectrum is the big signal here due to carbon dioxide, and the somewhat smaller signal here due to sulfur dioxide. So these are the first new additions to this list that James Webb has brought us. Good. So with that, I would be ready to go now into the topic of habitability. I don't know if there are any urgent questions at this point. But if not, let's see now which of all those planets are habitable. And I guess that in order to answer that, we first need to know, so what do we actually need to get life going on a planet? And then we don't, of course, quite know that. All we know is the example of the Earth. So most of this discussion is, of course, based on is somewhat Earth-centered. That's not by lack of imagination. It's just because we have no other example handy. So the first thing you need for life is an energy source, and that can be in many different forms. You can have the internal heat from a planet, right, left over from its formation, and this is, for example, you can tap into this on the ocean floor where there are volcanoes, as in this picture here at the top right. So in fact, people think that life on Earth has started in systems like these, in these underwater volcanoes, which are about 70 degrees, nice warm conditions, and very good to get life started. Another potential energy source is sunlight. This is, of course, what plants use today, using for photosynthesis and reducing CO2 into oxygen gas. There's chemical energy sources, bacteria use this, and of course there are also organisms like ourselves, the animals, which eat other organic or other organisms to get energy. So energy source is readily available. It can be present in many different forms. Second thing you need are nutrients, right? So you need to get volatile material, for example, to build membranes, to build information carriers, hormones, whatnot. And the bare minimum, chemically speaking, in terms of the volatile material, seems to be this set of 6 elements, in particular carbon, right? That's what life on Earth is all based on. It's all essentially carbon-bearing molecules. And then also this set of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and maybe also sulfur is essential. That's a bit more debated. So these are basically the elements that are present in DNA molecules, right? And then in most of most body cells also. There are some suggestions, maybe especially in the science fiction literature, that life doesn't need to be based on carbon. You could, for example, use silicon, which is chemically indeed somewhat similar, and it's also not that rare. It's depending on where you are. On Earth, it is twice as rare as carbon. On the Sun, it's more like 16 times rarer. But so it's not very rare. So from that point of view, that could be possible. The problem, I think, with silicon is that its oxide is not gaseous, right? So if you oxidize your silicon, you get, well, basically sand, right? Silicates, and that's not a gas. So you lock it up in solid material, and you can't use it any further. So I think that's the main problem with silicon-based life. The third thing, and most critically, is what you need for life is a solvent, a liquid that acts as a transporter to bring organic molecules together. And this is really a constraint on planets, because many materials can be in liquid form, but you need to have the right temperature and pressure. And this sets constraints on both the size of the planet and also on its orbit. And last but not least, what we need are stable conditions, right? It's nice if a planet is warm, but only for a short period of time, like a year or even several million years. That's not enough. Life needs quite some time to get started and then to develop itself. And so what we need is a planet around a long-lived star that is not too active. Right? Just stable, benign conditions. So these, I think, is the minimum set of conditions for life as we know it. There could be others. The Earth has many other properties that may or may not be essential. In particular, it has a magnetic field, right? That is certainly helpful to shield the surface and also the atmosphere from harmful radiation. The Earth also has plate tectonics, right? And that may be that plays a role in stabilizing the climate. And both of these factors, and there could be others, I'm sure they're helpful for life. Whether they are really essential or not to get life started, that is more of an open debate. So it could be, but we don't know if this is essential or just nice. So this idea of that we need a liquid for life leads to the concept of a circumstellar habitable zone. So right on Earth, this is water, and water is very good as a liquid because it is a polar species, right? So there's a positive and a negative sides to the water molecule, and this helps in creating structure in solutions. So this is good for example, if you want to build compartments like that leads to cells, and also, for example, to get the 3D structure of proteins. That's important for their catalytic function. The fact that water is polar also increases its melting and boiling points, and that is good because chemistry tends to be faster at higher temperatures. I guess other planets could use other liquids, right? So, for example, ammonia or methane can also be liquid, but they do so in a narrower range of temperature and pressure. So that's, then you need very specific conditions to have those substances liquid. And also, they have their melting and boiling points at lower temperatures. So the chemistry will be slower. That may not be a showstopper, but it makes it, I guess, more difficult for life to get going and to evolve. And you could, of course, have even different liquids, but then you quickly need rare elements, so that it's difficult to get large amounts of these liquids. But it may not be impossible. So if we stick with water as a solvent for now, this constrains temperature and pressure on the surface. Temperature obviously needs to be between freezing and boiling, and this constrains the distance from the star. So if you have a star like the sun, you need to be about, well, this distance, Earth-Sun distance, right, away. If you have a smaller star, you need to be closer in. Bigger star, you need to be further out, like in the diagram on the bottom right. And similarly, the pressure of the atmosphere is related to its surface gravity, so that constrains the size of the planet to be, well, about that of the Earth, but it's can be a bit larger or smaller. So how many of these exoplanets then do we have? So we have enough observations now that we can actually answer this. So this is an overview of known exoplanets. Actually, it's a few years old, but the statistics haven't changed so much. So this is going from small planets on the left, all the way up to very large planets on the right, and also warm planets at the top to cold planets at the bottom. And in the middle range, there are the planets with the right temperature and size to be to have liquid water on their surface. And if you add up the numbers, you find that about 1.5% of exoplanets is potentially habitable. How much is that? Well, that turns out to be a lot, 1%. If you know that the Milky Way, our host galaxy, right, has about 100 billion, excuse me, stars. So I already told you that there are at least as many planets as stars, so there are roughly 100 billion planets in the Milky Way. And if we just take 1% of that, that would mean that there are 1 billion habitable planets in our Milky Way alone. The universe in total has about 100 billion galaxies as it happens, so the total number of habitable planets in the universe will be 10 to the 20 or 100 billion, I guess. The number of exomoons may be even larger, by the way. So it's clear that there are lots and lots of habitable planets in the universe as a whole. You could, if you do this in more detail, you want to maybe stay away from the center of our galaxy where there is a lot of radiation present. You may want to stay away from the outer parts of the galaxy where there are not enough heavy elements around, but that only reduces your number by a factor of 2 or so. If you also want to only count long-lived stars, that's another factor of a few down. But the conclusion is inevitable that there are there are really lots of habitable planets in our Milky Way alone, and given that, it seems highly likely that there is that at least some of these are abundant, are inhabited. Good. So that is one line of argument. The opposite line is presumably due to this person here, Enrico Fermi, and the argument is simple. Is that we have searched for now several decades for signs of life on other planets. For example, using radio telescopes, looking for signals broadcast by such civilizations, and also any signs on the Earth, leftovers from visits by extraterrestrial civilizations. And none of these have been successful. So if there were really if a significant fraction of these habitable planets in the Milky Way were inhabited just like the Earth, we should have seen signs of such civilizations, and we haven't, right? So something is wrong. Right, maybe not all of these habitable planets are inhabited, but why aren't we seeing at least some signs of civilization elsewhere? That's the question now, and that's the part. That's part 3 of this seminar. Why aren't we seeing any signs of extraterrestrial civilizations? Let's have to answer this. Let's have a brief look at the history of life on Earth. Don't want to do this in too much detail, but the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, right here at the bottom of the graph. Initially, it was a lava planet, but then it cooled off, and liquid water appeared very soon. And the earliest signs of life are as old as 4 billion years. For a long time, this was single-celled life. It developed photosynthesis, which created then oxygen in the atmosphere, right? One major step up was the invention of the nucleus of the cell about 2 billion years ago. And that led then to organisms that consist of multiple cells that work together, and this allows, of course, for diversification, right? So they can divide up the tasks between them, and this leads to more modern versions, forms of life like plants and also animals, and that's like 500 million years ago. And of course, mammals and human beings are much more recent than that. It hasn't been always easy for life, right? And certainly the early years were very difficult, but it is the case that bacteria are very, very old, right? Up to 4 billion years, 90% of the age of the Earth. There have been so the early years were tough, and since then there have also been several near complete extinctions of life on Earth. We know this from fossil records and other evidence. There also have been several complete glaciations, right? So they're listed here, and you can look this up if you want more detail. So complete snowball states. This has to do with variations in the orbit of the Earth. I recommend, if you want to know more about this, look up this term Milankovitch cycle. So these are periodic changes in the orbit of the Earth, and this leads to climate change. So what is wrong? Why don't we see civilizations everywhere? So there are a few theories about this, and the first one is that life is much easier to sustain than it is to start. And the example of that, I guess, is Mars, which is of course cold and dry, but it is not so unlike some places on Earth, right? Some deserts that are cold. It's tough living, but certainly bacteria exist there too. So maybe Mars is an example of a place where, you know, life would survive if it was there already, but it isn't. The conditions aren't good enough to start life. What I said on the previous page also, conditions of life on planets evolve, right? The orbits are oscillating a bit, and so climate changes, and life must adapt. So it's important that if you have life on a planet, that it evolves and diversifies so that it can cope with changes in conditions. Second possible bottleneck is evolution. So here's a picture of the Arecibo radio telescope before it collapsed a few years ago, right? And it was used a lot to search for signals from extraterrestrial civilizations. So keep in mind that most life on Earth is bacteria. Most people, of course, when they think about life, they think of plants and animals, but this is actually only a small fraction of their biomass. Even our bodies contain more bacteria than our own body cells, by number anyway. By mass, the body cells win because they're bigger. And many places on Earth only support bacterial life. And as I said, 90% of the Earth history, the Earth has seen bacteria, but only 10% there have been plants and animals. Yeah, so cells with a nucleus, multicellular organisms are a recent thing in that sense. And of course, intelligent life, I mean, you can debate what that exactly means. You can define that as organisms working together, but let's for now use the concept of detectable life, right? So life that can communicate with radio signals, and these we could pick up with telescopes like Arecibo. So Well, Homo sapiens, of course, has been present for about 100,000 years. That is a small fraction of Earth history, 1 in 45,000. But even so, if you divide the number of habitable planets by this number, you would expect 22,000 civilizations in our galaxy, and we're not seeing them, right? So this is the paradox as Fermi posed it. You can further reduce this, of course, by the time span where humans have actually used radios, and then the number becomes really small. So we need further searches for these civilizations kind of definitively answer this question. But so this gives some insight into why these civilizations may be rare, because it takes a long time for for communication abilities, radio technology to build up. What it seems, what it could mean, this lack of SETI signal in the past, well, say 5 decades that we've looked for it, is that either life could go extinct in most cases. So this may have happened on Mars and Venus, right? So both probably were more habitable long ago, but they have lost this capability. So Mars is now too cold and dry. Has lost most of its atmosphere. It used to have running water on its surface, right? So conditions were better, but it has lost this. And Venus, on the other hand, is now much too hot, and therefore it has also lost its water because it has just evaporated and then got lost in the to outer space. That is one possibility. The other option is that on other planets there may be not enough options to evolve beyond a certain point. And this is particularly true for systems like Europa or Enceladus. So these are moons of Jupiter and Saturn, respectively, where there is liquid water, but below an ice layer of several kilometers thick. So the oceans on those moons may well contain simple life forms, but they are never exposed to sunlight, and so they can never tap into sunlight as an energy source, and so they will have to remain at a very simple level and never develop anything close to radio technology. And then, of course, there are extinctions. The Earth has seen quite a few. Only in our fossil records there have been mass extinctions. The most famous ones, I guess, are the ones that killed the dinosaurs at the end of the Mesozoic, and so that was caused by an impact. And also there has been a big one at the start of the Mesozoic, and that was due to a surge in volcanism. So both caused massive climate change and extinction of most major life on Earth. There have also been major extinctions before the advent of plants and animals. So these are associated with the rising levels of first methane and later oxygen in the atmosphere. And ironically, so these gases are produced by bacteria. So this concept is known as the median hypothesis, is that actually life sort of kills itself, right? And some people would say that the same thing is happening today with us emitting too much carbon dioxide. So the solution that life, at least on Earth, has found against extinction is biodiversity, right? So some species may not survive changes in climate, but others may actually do better in the new conditions. That is one thing, and the other thing is to have an ecosystem, right? And then the example of that would be that plants use carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, and then animals do it the other way around, so that we help, in a sense, each other and keep a balance of these gases in our atmosphere. And the driver for biodiversity and also for ecosystems is to have a complex environment where conditions change from place to place, so that there is a need for many species, each having their own sort of niche habitats somewhere on the planet. Biologists term this in terms of selection pressure. So if there is not enough selection pressure, then life has no need to evolve, which makes it then vulnerable if there is a change in conditions. And if the selection pressure is too high, all of a sudden, then life has no time to evolve, because evolution, after all, is a fairly slow process. Good, so that was part 3 of the talk, and I see that we are getting late, so I'm not sure if we really have time for searches of life. Maybe Mariette or someone else, what do you think? Shall we first
it depends
go to,
how long it starts.
yeah, I think I'll need until 5, and then maybe people will have to go, and it would be too bad if there was no opportunity for questions. So I don't know. I can try and do it quickly.
How long do you need, you think?
If
That's
you can
what I
do it
said.
in 10 minutes, I think it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just say again, Wolf.
It's fine with me also.
Okay, so try to do this quick then. So how can we look for life on other planets? There are well, there are several different ideas. There are you could look for complex physical or chemical structures. Chemical disequilibrium in particular is often mentioned. You could also try and look into the production of biomass and waste, although we don't quite know how to do that. Often used methods are to look for specific abundances of certain elements or isotopes or specific molecules. Even better are combinations of molecules. For example, the combination of molecular oxygen and methane in our own atmosphere is such a disequilibrium, and that's of course only sustainable if you have if you're producing both gases in for example by bacteria. And then also popular are technosignatures, right? So this here illustrates a Dyson sphere, so it's trying to capture a lot of the most of the light of this host star of the planet, and so because advanced civilizations will need lots of energy, so this way they would capture most of the stellar energy from this Dyson sphere. Of course, naturally, most of these biosignatures that colleagues are trying to develop are based on life on Earth, and that is again not by lack of imagination, but just because it is hard to search for something that you don't know. People do try to do that, and so this field is known as agnostic biosignatures, but that is even harder. You're looking for some kind of complexity, but it's difficult to know what you're searching for exactly. So specifically, so the first type, I guess, of biosignatures is used for the early Earth, right? Trying to go back to see when life got started and what it looked like back then. So there are, let's not go into details, but there are lots of methods that people use to prove that life really was started very early on Earth and got diversified slowly. There's also people search on meteorites for well, maybe not for signs of life, but at least for organic matter. One famous example is shown here. It's a Murchison meteorite that is very rich in amino acids, right, the building blocks of proteins. It also has signs of that there's liquid water-based chemistry occurred. Interestingly, this meteorite has several amino acids that are not known on Earth, not naturally occurring, right? And also the amino acids have this property that they come in two symmetries, in a left and right-handed symmetries, and they tend to be, and they are on this meteorite. The left and right versions are about equally abundant, and this is not like on Earth. So that's very interesting. It means that this kind of organic matter is can originate elsewhere than certainly exists outside the Earth, and well, maybe in fact common. So this gives sometimes rise to a debate where meteorites and other messengers in fact brought at least the building blocks, perhaps the life itself to Earth. It's actually the idea is pretty old. It's still you still hear it now and then. Other colleagues look for biosignatures in space. For example, here on Mars, this is an example of a meteorite that actually came to us from Mars, and so the people have studied this in great detail and looking for fossilized bacteria or for signs of life on this on this meteorite. I don't think they have managed to really convince everybody, but you know, people keep trying this. Atmospheric composition I mentioned as a method. This with this O2 and methane. Other people use the color, in particular reflectance spectrum, and the chlorophyll of plant leaves has a very distinct reflectance spectrum, for example. So this is sometimes what people also suggest as a biosignature for exoplanets. Yeah, there is actually, if you want to know more about this, here's a good paper to read by Schwieterman et al. So that sort of illustrates this. So there are gases in the atmosphere that could be, you know, produced by organisms. Here's the reflection of the surface. Here's this reflection of green leaves. There are also people who suggest temporal variation. So if you have essentially seasons on your planet, that could the life could then you know, get more active in summer and passive in winter. So that's also suggested as a way to search for life. I should mention that also polarized light is sometimes also suggested. So this could be scattered by either by aerosol or reflected off chlorophyll leaves again. Here's an example of searches on Mars for life. So this is the methane abundance in the atmosphere, and it has this sort of periodic variation. A couple of years ago, people got very excited about this because methane on Earth is mostly produced by bacteria. And so if this is also produced periodically on Mars, that could be a sign of bacteria in the subsurface. I don't think this is conclusive evidence, but it is intriguing. And on Enceladus, there are also signs of primitive life, perhaps, right? So Enceladus, again, is this icy moon of Saturn, where there is this ice layer at the top, then there is this liquid ocean below it, and probably at the bottom of this ocean, there are these sort of volcanoes, right? So hydrothermal activity. And people think this because from the ice surface, there are so-called plumes, so gas emissions that are picked up by the Cassini spacecraft in particular, a couple of years ago. And they have studied these plumes in some detail. So they consist not only of water, but they also contain salts and also hydrogen gas. So that's quite curious. That is a suggestion of this hydrothermal activity, and also organic matter. So it is, well, can't be ruled out. It is a possibility that there are some simple life forms in this subsurface ocean. Of course, it would have to be simple because it doesn't have access to sunlight. So this would be mostly bacteria living off chemical energy. The moon Europa around Jupiter is a bit similar in structure, and it will be visited by spacecraft this decade. And I think it would be good if we should also plan a visit to Enceladus and investigate its structure in more detail. Good. I think I want to leave it at that. Let's just summarize the main message here. First of all, conditions like the Earth are very common throughout the universe, right? Habitable planets are really abundant, essentially 1 billion in our Milky Way alone. And that means, given that for most of the age of the Earth, there have been bacteria, that bacterial life is highly likely, at least in the Milky Way, and it may even exist in some places in our solar system. It's quite different if you talk about communicative life that is, for example, able to emit radio signals. We observe this to be very rare, right? There is no convincing SETI signal picked up by a radio telescope. There are no signs of visits. So clearly, this is a rare thing, and we don't quite understand why that is. But there are several. There's no lack of possible reasons. Could be that only very few habitable planets are in fact inhabited. That's one thing, possibility. It could be that on most planets life doesn't evolve that far, right? And a third possibility is that extinctions are common. So maybe we are just very lucky here on Earth that no extinction has been completely wiped out all the life on Earth. So what we need to find out are to develop reliable biosignatures for exoplanets and to keep looking for technosignatures, SETI signals, and so to find out which of these three is closest to reality. Fortunately, there is a lot of activity planned to make progress in this field. So this year, the JUICE mission and next year the Europa Clipper are both missions to the icy moons of Jupiter and learn more about conditions there, or Europa, but also other moons. There are the Plato and Ariel missions planned to learn more about conditions on exoplanets, terrestrial planets in Earth-like orbits. Ariel is more about the atmospheres of super-Earths. 27, there is the first light for the European Extremely Large Telescope, and in particular the METIS instrument is here really crucial for exoplanet studies. It will allow for direct detection of exoplanets in the mid-infrared. And spectroscopically, it's very interesting because it can you can observe the molecular oxygen in particular through the so-called A band in the red part of the spectrum. And then further in the future, there is the Habitable Worlds Observatory planned by NASA around 2040, and that will be able to take reflection spectra in the optical of Earth analogs. And maybe a decade later or so, there will be the Large Interferometer for Exoplanets. That will be studying mid-infrared emission spectra, again, of Earth analogs. If you want to know more about this, I can recommend two books. First of all, there is this great book by Stefan Webb talking about this Fermi paradox in much more detail and possible solutions to it. And if maybe a fun book, I'm looking forward, it will appear this year, commissioned by our own European Astrobiology Institute, the collection Life Beyond Us, with a lot of, a few tens of science fiction stories and also essays about reality. So I wish you happy reading, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
I can.
Okay, thank you. I have a double question concerning the bottlenecks. One possibility is that the emergence of life could be rare. I mean, basically, you consider that every time that you have an habitable planet, you have the emergence of life. This could not be the case. Usually, there is an argument. The fact that life evolved showed up very early during Earth's life is considered an evidence that the emergence of life is easy, but this is not true. I mean, if you make a statistical analysis, you can prove that this is not true. So the emergence of life could be rare. And then, if you speak with biologists, for instance, I had almost a quarrel with Antonio Lazcano, they are going to tell you that the emergence of a different civilization could be extremely rare because the sequence of events that brought to the birth of the human being is so specific that could be simply impossible to replicate. So these are the two objections that I got during my talks. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think these are both valid points. It certainly, so the broadest definition of habitability here is only based on the possibility of liquid water, and that may not nearly be enough, of course. Maybe, for example, these additional conditions like the proper magnetic field and the presence of plate tectonics, if you apply those, that reduces the number of habitable cases. I don't see, I still think though that the conditions as we have them on Earth, well, as we have them today, but also as they were on the early Earth, are not really very special. The main building blocks that we need are quite universal. So I don't really see why why there should be this rare, why the emergence of life should be so rare. But of course, I can approve this. I just don't see any argument why it should be rare. And what was your second suggestion again?
The point is that people studying evolution says that the emergence of humanity is the result of many events that are particular, and the sequence, the total sequence of events that brought to the emergence of a species like ours is very unlikely.
Yeah. So this is essentially what I was saying as the that we need just the right level of selection pressure, and that we need a diversity of conditions, right, in order so that we get biodiversity. And you know, the selection pressure may be a bit too high or a bit too low on many other planets, so that would reduce obviously the number of planets with highly developed life by factors of many. So I agree with you that that is quite possible. Of course, we don't need to get other planets with human beings just like us, right? That would lay the bar too high, I would say. We just, it is enough if life develops somewhere else up to a point where it can develop radio technology so that we can find out about its existence.